So hi everyone. Sorry for the couple minutes delay. Welcome to this symposium on the home learning environment in different situations. So it will be a relatively short session with only 3 speakers, which would ideally leave lots of time for questions. So hopefully that will work out great. We will have the first presentation by Venera Gashaj, who will talk about game-based interventions and game-based activities in the home learning environment and numerical skills. And then we will have Caylee Cook talking about the home learning environment in a low SES environment in South Africa. And then myself, I will talk about home learning environment in COVID times in Paris. So we will start with Venera, if that's okay for her. I'm just going to make you host and then you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, thank you.
That should be fine now.
Should be. Let me see if it works. Okay. I hope it works. Can you see?
Yes, so it's not in full screen mode yet.
Now?
Yeah, great.
Great. Okay. So welcome everyone to the first part of the symposium, where I will talk about how play behavior affects executive functions and numerical skills in primary school children. This project was a collaboration between the ETH Zürich and the University of Bern in Switzerland. So about play behavior, I know today we're actually talking about the home learning environment. And for me, I will focus a little bit more on, well, I call it play behavior because play is the most natural way children learn all over the world. And it's very important for child development, actually in different areas like the physical development, cognitive, social, and also emotional development. It is a good way to learn because it actually provides opportunities, hands-on experiences or for sensory learning and engaging in a variety of environments that maybe without play wouldn't be possible. So traditionally, what was done was play behavior was mostly looked at in young children, and it was something like pretend play and the relationship between pretend play and cognitive development. But with newer media, the interest shifted a little bit also into, for example, video games or touchscreen games and exer games. And then also I would actually include the home learning environment also into this, which is interactions between parents and siblings, available resources in the home, such as games or it's literacy, books, and activities for the child. So I think we're all familiar with the term home numeracy, where it's looked at how many numerical games are, for example, available at home. So what I was thinking was, okay, so there's these different games that children play, like video games, touchscreen games, exer games, board games. So how do these games or the engagement in these games actually influence the development of executive functions or numerical skills? And also, I don't know, I think I didn't say it yet, but exer games are games, video games that are played with a console where movements are also recorded. So it's like, for example, if you know Wii Sports or something like that, where you can play tennis, and then the movement of the racket, for example, of the arm as a racket, is actually shown in the screen with your avatar. So exergames are a combination of games and exercise. So I was looking at executive functions because this is something very general that develops in childhood very, very like a lot also before children enter school. And executive functions is an umbrella term for various cognitive processes in which we, for example, have to restrain a dominant but maybe inappropriate response, or regulation, monitoring, controlling of information processes, also keeping and manipulating goals, or also flexibly switching the focus of attention from one aspect or one task to the other, and also adaptation to change. So in most of the literature, there are three distinct constructs that people look at, or researchers look at, and these are inhibition, switching, and updating. Inhibition being, as I said in the beginning, the restraining of a dominant but maybe inappropriate response. Switching as the switch of the focus of attention to be able to switch between tasks. And updating would be the keeping and manipulating of information in mind. There's also literature about how play behavior supports the development of executive functions. So it was shown that children develop self-control skills by taking turns and thinking before acting in games. So there's actually a lot of literature already there with different play behavior, and also with, for example, board games, but also video games. And most of the time it's actually supporting development. For numeracy or mathematical skills, I usually divide this into two categories, which are either informal and formal, or if you want, non-symbolic and symbolic. So informal skills are basic skills that are learned through everyday activities. So this is also what I call non-symbolic: number processing and counting. Or I think a lot of us are familiar with the ANS system. And then formal skills are more advanced and require the knowledge of symbols. So I also call this symbolic skills. And these are usually measured with symbolic comparison task or the symbolic number line estimation task. Then I already mentioned in the beginning, the home environment actually that shows us that there's access to board games positively influences the development of numeracy and math skills. If these board games have some kind of numerical aspect to them. And then there's also research showing that video games, like on consoles and other electronic media use, has small or no effect actually on numeracy in grades 3 to 5, which was a little bit surprising for me. But then I was looking further into the literature, and what I saw was, again, video games were not related to numeracy in grade 5. And then I also saw that home numeracy actually was predictive of non-symbolic but not symbolic skills. So what I was interested in were the symbolic skills and executive functions. So I kind of expected that there was no effect of video games or other games on symbolic skills later in life, but I was expecting that there was a positive effect on executive functions. So what did we do? We did this longitudinal study where we tested children in kindergarten and then 18 months later in 2nd grade. And this was a mixed method design, which means that we had individual test sessions where we tested children with different tests. And there was also a questionnaire for parents where they filled out, or they gave us information about play behavior of their children in kindergarten at T1. In the beginning of the study, we had 164 children, but then the return rate of the questionnaire was 120. 120 parents actually gave us back the questionnaire. And then also there were dropouts because of the longitudinal design, so that the final sample in the end consisted of 97 children and 46 of them were female. The mean age in kindergarten was almost 5, and in 2nd grade it was 8 years. The individual test sessions took about 45 minutes, and we performed them in school in a quiet room with each child separately. For the executive function tests, we used, well, for inhibition and switching, we used an adapted flanker task. And the most known is Erickson and Erickson, but this was actually an adapted version by LaPsyDÉ et al. In which the flanking stimuli were fish, and the children had to either focus on the middle fish and tell us where the mouth was, because the task was actually that they had to feed the fish, but they only had to feed either the middle fish or the flanking fish. So they had to point to where their mouth was, on the left or on the right side. And then for updating, we had 2 tests, with the visual spatial test, which is a subtest of the working memory test battery, and the subtest was matrix, and there was a matrix, and squares on the matrix would turn black one after the other, and then children had to show in reversed order which squares were black. And then for the verbal one, we had a computerized backward color span task in which there were discs with different colors, and the children had to tell us again in reversed order which color the discs had. For the numeracy tests, we did symbolic magnitude comparison and symbolic number line estimation, and both were adapted versions of Lasky and Ziegler's tasks, adapted by Friese van den Bos. Then the questionnaire for the parents was actually a combination of 2 questionnaires. It was the one by Squargshank and Lefebvre, and also Bus et al. And so these were questions specifically regarding the type of play behavior, type of games, the frequency, and the duration of play behavior. So for the type of game, we had board games and video games, and then the video games had subtypes such as exergame, touchscreen games, 3-dimensional games, or puzzle games. And actually there's one more, it's numerical games. Yeah, and the frequency was measured on a scale from 1 to 7. So how many times a week do they play? Now, these are the descriptives for the play behavior. And also, I found this very important to have some examples for the games, because I wasn't very familiar with them. So I had to look them up to see what they actually comprise. And so you can see that here at the type of game, the question was, does your child play video games, for example? And then 78 of the children actually did play video games, and 19 didn't. And then the subtypes: puzzle, 3-dimensional, balancing, objects, extra games, touchscreen. Yeah, I was surprised that only 18 children actually played exer games, because they seem to be very popular. And then for board games, 93 children out of the whole sample played board games and only 4 didn't, which I think is also surprising that 4 didn't play them. So here are the correlations between play behavior and executive functions. Below the diagonal, there are the executive functions from the first time point, and above the diagonal, the executive functions for the second measurement point in second grade. So based on these correlations, we took the games that were correlated to the executive functions, and then after that, put them into hierarchical regression models to see if and how they predicted executive functions in second grade, while controlling for executive functions in first grade. No, in kindergarten, sorry. And then here are the results of the correlations between play behavior and math skills. And as you can see here, they are not related. There's nothing like, yeah, unfortunately, and apparently they are not related at all. There was one game type, puzzle games, which was related to magnitude comparison in the first measurement point. But it was also negatively correlated. So in the end, we couldn't really perform hierarchical regression models with these data. But we did for inhibition and updating, for example. So on the left side, you see the regression model for inhibition. And here, board games were, oh, also there's a minus there. It's because inhibition was measured as reaction time. So the slower, no, the lower the reaction time was, the better. That's why, yeah, board games negatively predict inhibition at the second measurement point, and quite strongly. And for updating, board games didn't predict updating in second grade, and also duration of video games was not a significant predictor in the end. And the last regression model is for switching, and here we see that exer games and puzzle games predicted switching at the switching in second grade. And again, switching was also measured as reaction time. So the puzzling thing here is that exer games seem to help the development of switching skills, but puzzle games don't. So in the end, what can we say? There was no effect found for mathematical skills, which is in line with previous studies showing no effect of video games or electronic media use on formal math skills in grades 3 to 5. What is possible, or what could be an explanation, would be that maybe there would be an indirect effect through informal math skills, so through non-symbolic skills, that maybe at least home numeracy would predict it indirectly. And another explanation could be that maybe they would also be indirectly affected through executive functions. There's a study that I did actually where we could show that executive functions were mediating between mathematical skills and basic numerical skills. So inhibition was predicted by previous engagement in board games. And this was also in line with previous intervention, but also observational studies indicating that these kind of playful activities have an enhancing effect on the development of inhibition or executive functions. And this might be because in board games, there's some kind of social order, and these games are played in a group of 2 to 4 people. So children have to adapt and behave in a socially accepted way, which also means that they have to inhibit their responses, that they have to wait for their turn, and that they, they have to inhibit their reactions and not give away, for example, their cards, or not speak when they shouldn't, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of opportunities for children to practice inhibition. So switching was positively predicted by previous engagement in exer games, but it was negatively predicted by engagement in puzzle games. There are also studies showing before this study that exergaming improved executive functions in children. So at least we know that exergames seem to be helpful for that. And this might be true because the combination of physical and cognitive challenges create this constant dynamic, situation where children or also other people have to divide their attention or their focused attention between different things that they have to do while they are playing the game. And the negative effect of puzzle games might be explained by their rather simple mechanics and the lack of more complex goals in puzzle games, because they typically focus on one single simple rule. And this is why the players don't actually have to switch between different rules. And therefore, there's no opportunity to train switching abilities. And there's actually also a study showing that after playing for 15 hours, a simple puzzle game, that this did not enhance executive functions. And also, if you engage in only this kind of game type, if you only engage in puzzle games, then there's also less time to actually practice switching abilities. For updating, as I said, there was neither the duration nor the frequency of the play behavior was influencing them. What we saw, or what is seen in literature, is that the duration of 30 minutes per day has actually no detrimental effect on executive function. So in our sample, the children were mostly not playing more than 30 minutes per day. So maybe that was why we didn't see an effect there. I mean, it's good that we didn't see an effect there also, because that might have been a negative effect. And then the question was, why was updating not predicted by any game type? And the explanation for that might be that so these 3 executive function components, they follow each their own trajectory, and these trajectories seem to operate concurrently, and inhibition lays the groundwork for the other components to develop. So it might be that updating is actually enhanced indirectly by the games that enhance inhibition, and that's why we didn't see an effect there. And that was it from my side.
Great, thank you so much, Venera. Any questions for Venera before we go to the next speaker? So if there's no questions now, you can always put them in chat or ask at the end if there's time left over. So Caylee, you should be able to share your screen now, so you can put up your screen.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Let me get to sharing. Okay, can we see?
Yeah, it's not in full screen mode yet.
And now?
Yeah. Oh, we can see your next slide.
Yeah. Let me just do this rather. Let me stop and do that again. Two seconds. And there we are. That looked better.
Yeah, great.
All right. Just to put out, my Wi-Fi has been a bit flaky, so if I disappear, Ilse, would you mind just sort of putting your hand up or something so I can see that, and I will stop and see if I can move or do something about it. But thank you to everyone for coming and to Ilse for organizing this. And yeah, as she mentioned, today we're going to be talking about numeracy in the home learning environment in low-income South Africa. To put it into context, this is an ongoing longitudinal study or short longitudinal study that we're doing as a collaboration between the University of Wits, Oxford, Carleton University, and Wollongong University, with a few of us in the current symposium. Rebecca and Gaia are sitting here. So yeah, hopefully we can. This is the first data. So it'll be really exciting for us to get some input, and yeah, kind of we've got a long way to go with this data, and this is only from our first time point, so only cross-sectional data from our first time point, and we should be finishing the project by the end of this year. So hope you enjoy it. So just to talk about the home learning environment, we know that a wide range of settings have shown that the home learning environment is really important in the development of academic skills, including numeracy, and that opportunities for learning in young children need to first be created in the home, especially if children are not attending any type of preschool. If we have a quick look at numeracy, we know that early numeracy correlates with later school age maths and learning performance. Research has also shown that parent engagement in child numeracy activities can relate to early numeracy skills. However, there have been some cross-cultural differences in these results and in this research that has led to some mixed results. Then if we have a look at low-income South Africa, which is where the study is being conducted, and our friend Tato over here, he is, let's say, one of our participants. And for boys like Tato, many children like him do not have access to any sort of preschool or ECD program like the children in the current study. We know that parents and caregivers can often be poorly educated. They may have not have finished school or even gone to school. In a lot of these settings, parents and caregivers are also unaware of the important role that they play in stimulating their child and in their child's education and early learning. Being low income and in poverty, there's a lack of resources in the home as well. You know, there's not many puzzles and number activity books and those types of things. Then if we also take a look at what numeracy might look like in low income South Africa, research that has taken place has shown significant differences in early numeracy skills between low income and high income children within South Africa, and particularly when they start school. Research has also shown that many of these low income children are starting school with inadequate basic numeracy skills and are not performing at grade level. And widespread research has shown that this gap between high and low income children in numeracy as well just widens as children go through school. So these early years are incredibly important and vital to get children on a good level to start school. So talking about that, what might the home environment actually look like in low income South Africa? So Tato might live in a community that looks a bit like this. We recruited our participants through an organization that works with about 8,000 families in low-income areas in and around the Western Cape. We looked predominantly in Cape Town, in and around Cape Town, and we recruited from 4 different communities. these communities can be categorized into two different ones that both share challenges such as crime, unemployment, food insecurity, but also they may have some unique challenges to the specific community, such as increased gang or drug activity within the community. So here's some more pictures about where some of the children come from and what their essentially their home learning environment or their home environment would look like. So just to put into context. So what was our aim? As I said, this is part of a bigger study, but what was our aim for this particular piece of work? And that was to explore the relationship between the home learning environment, and by that, which we'll talk a bit about later, we mean resources in the home, activities done with the children by the caregiver or the family members, as well as time available to spend with the children. We also looked at household income, parental caregiver education, and we also looked at child exposure to violence. So we really wanted to see how this learning environment and might be related to the numeracy skills of these children from these communities. In other words, we wanted to know, is his home learning environment associated with his numeracy skills? So in terms of our participants, as I said, we recruited from 4 different communities. We recruited, for example, Tato and his grandmother, was Gogo, who is his caregiver, as well as 242 other children and their caregivers. The children were between 3 to 5 years old. They were not attending any sort of ECD center. And the parents or caregivers wasn't always the parent, had to be older than 18 years of age, so not a child-headed household. And then our participants had a mean age of 4 years and 8 months. So they were, pretty much between 3 and 5 years. Then for questionnaire, we had such as age, caregiver education, people in the household, that type of thing, child exposure to community violence. Sorry, I see your hand there. Am I back?
Yeah, you're back, it's fine.
Okay, yeah, sorry, thanks. Then we also asked about the home learning environment. So as I said, this included learning activities, resources in the home, time spent with the child. And then we asked about income. So we asked about the household income as a range, and the house assets, which is a very commonly used method to measure household income within South Africa. Just to note, the home learning environment tools we also got from researchers who've been working in this in South Africa. So these tools were very much for South Africa. Then for the child, the numeracy tests included, am I back?
Yeah, sorry. It's always just a little moment. So it should be fine.
Yeah, I'll slow down. Hopefully it'll catch up. So the numeracy tests we did with the children included a number identification task, a number counting task, and the give in for cardinality. And this give-in task, the picture over there is an example of how we asked it. So we had a little puppy, and we asked the children to please give the puppy a certain N number of sticks. And that is how we measured our cardinality. So in terms of how we tested this, due to COVID and lockdowns, a lot of the questionnaires occurred over the phone. Some occurred in person. The testing itself obviously had to occur in person, some of which happened in the homes of the child, which wouldn't always necessarily be a quiet space in the home. That doesn't exactly exist in these homes. And others, because the communities were actually so dangerous, our team couldn't go into the households, and so we had to use the organization's hall to do the testing as well. So a bit of a mixed match, but that is the reality of these settings as well as the reality of the children growing up here. So if we have a look at some of the results, the descriptive results, in terms of the demographics, 95% of the caregivers reported that their monthly household income was below 6,000 Rand a month. That is below $423 per month for the household, not per person. 67% of which reported an income between 750 and 3,000 Rand a month. That's between 53 and $233 per month. Just to put that into context, within South Africa, we have what's called the national poverty lines, and the food poverty line, which is the threshold of absolute deprivation, where the amount of money they have doesn't even cover the daily energy intake that you need. That is 620 Rand per person in the household. Whereas our income ranges that we mentioned above is for the entire household, which had an average amount of people of 5 per household. So even within the South African context, these are really low income families. Then in terms of the caregiver education, 25% or only 25% of the caregivers had completed high school, and only 15% of those who completed high school had any sort of post-school training. In toys and resources in the home that we asked about, commonly mentioned toys were cars, dolls, chairs, balls. Also mentioned many homemade toys such as cars with boxes, and household object play, included bottles and bottle caps. 31% reported that there were no books in the house. Books house only reported about an average of 3 books per household. And again, to put that into perspective, the caregivers could often count the exact number of books and toys that they had in a household, which if you compare to perhaps your house and your children, or people you know, you wouldn't even be able to start to count the amount of toys and books that you have. So even though they reported having some, the numbers are still very low. Then if we look at some of the numeracy, or the home learning activities in terms of activities done with the child. So this graph shows you the frequency. So parents were asked whether they never, sometimes, or many times did these activities with their child in a week. And the red bar is the never, the blue bar is the many times. So if we take a look here, we can see that when you look at reading picture books and drawing or painting things, we see the red bars is then if we have a look in the middle, the blue bars are really high for singing songs, taking the child. Here's it back. Okay, taking the child outside the home, playing with the child, telling the child the name of things. Even they reported counting things with their child quite a lot. So interestingly, you know, the activities that seem to not actually require too many resources are being done, but those that require resources, that is being reported that they've done far less than the others. Then for time spent with the child, this was asked on the weekdays and on weekends. And as you can see in the percentages, it's pretty split. So a large proportion of parents saying they have a lot of time, so more than 2 hours in the day, but an equally large proportion saying they don't have a lot of times, even more so on the weekends compared to the weekdays. So this study did report more time that the caregivers had than has been seen previously in South African research. However, this time may have been affected by lockdowns. Many of these questionnaires were done during our lockdown, changes in employment due to COVID-19, or the number of children within the household as well. Then the numeracy results for number counting, the score ranged between 0 and 6. We had an average of about 2.6. Number identification, the score ranged between 0 and 7, again, only an average of about 2.1. When we look at the give-in results for cardinality, we can see that there were about 71% of the children who weren't CP knowers, so they couldn't give us more than 5 things. So overall, the numeracy results here indicate quite poor numeracy skills across the sample. Then to have a look at the correlations. So how are all of these associated? Are we seeing the relationships between the home learning environment, frequency of activities, resources, and any of the numeracy outcomes? And the short answer is no. We see some associations between age and the numeracy scores, which we would expect, and it's good to see. And then the only other thing that we see associations with is toys in the household for counting and the give-in score, but that is negatively associated. So going the opposite direction than one would expect. We did see some very interesting results when it comes to settings. So as I said, the communities that we recruited from can be classified into 2 separate settings. And there does seem to be a lot going on within the communities themselves. Sex was interestingly associated with time with the child and toys in the household, in that caregivers of boys tended to have more time to spend with the child and more toys in the household compared to girls. And then in terms of frequency of home learning activities, we see a positive association between time spent with the child and the frequency, which would make sense, as well as the income score used, which was the household item score, was positively associated with the frequency of home learning activities. So we are seeing a relationship between that and income. But again, when it comes to the numeracy scores, as the previous talk as well, no relationships to be seen. So basically, if we were to compare Tato, our friend who's come with us to the presentation, and his friend Nandi, they're both 4 years, 8 months old. Tato's family has a very low household income of 750 to 1,500 Rand per month. He has limited exposure to violence, but as Gogo, who takes care of him, only has a grade 9. But he might have an older cousin who spends more time with him, compared to Nandi, who has a higher income household, but her community has high levels of violence. She has some books and puzzles, but mom works hard and she's looked after by her neighbor during the day. From our study, who of those 2 would we assume would have better numeracy skills? And the short answer is, we don't know. The study hasn't quite showed us any of that yet. We looked at various factors within the child's home environment, but we did not focus in specifically on, numeracy, specific numeracy activities. We did ask about counting things with the child, but when it comes to these settings, we know it can be insensitive to ask them, how many times did you play Candy Crush on the iPad? Because the screens, they won't have iPads at home, or, mathematics books or something like that. So it is a bit difficult to really ask about those things if we know it can be quite insensitive. What we also have been looking at and discussing is that perhaps quantitative methods and hypotheses may not apply to these very complex settings within South Africa. Factors other than the home learning environment or income may be more important for numeracy development. So as you said, there might be something going on in the communities that might be influencing numeracy, or just something that we haven't measured, and that quantitative analyses just cannot get to. So in conclusion, children in low-income South Africa have a challenging home environment, limited resources, low or poor education of the parents or the caregivers. They're exposed to high rates of stress and exposed to high rates of violence as well. The caregivers often have a lack of capacity to stimulate the child, either because of time, resources, and then needs may actually differ between different low-income communities. So even though these were collected within a couple kilometers of each other, the communities themselves differ very vastly across the communities. But what we do know is that there are many activities happening that do not require resources. So parents reported singing songs, going outside. They even spoke about telling stories. That seems to be happening a lot. And although these may not be impacting numeracy skills directly, or that we've seen, there may still be other positive outcomes from these activities. And this could indicate that we could leverage these low resource activities for numeracy development when you're thinking of interventions following this. And then lastly, where to now? These settings are incredibly complex and multi-layered, and we think that qualitative research, as well as lots more local input, may be needed to better understand these settings, the numeracy needs of the children, and how we can help these children bring their numeracy skills up to par to start school. So just to also show, this is an infographic that we developed to feed back to the communities we work with based on the numeracy scores that we received. While testing, it was quite clear that a lot of the parents kind of might have assumed their children knew how to count, but they never really tried to, they didn't know their child couldn't count. And so parents seem to be quite unaware of the role that they play in their children's numeracy development. So this infographic was developed to show the parents that really numbers are everywhere, and that numeracy games and skills can be acquired in everyday activities. So we hope to make a few more of these as our research results come out. And just in case you're wondering what happened to Tato, he did have good numeracy skills and he became an engineer. And Nandi, she also had good numeracy skills and she became a successful entrepreneur. So thank you very much and stay tuned for more.
Thank you so much, Caylee. Do we have a short question for Caylee now? And otherwise, you can always put them in chat. I'm sure she's happy to answer them in chat as well. If not, I will share my screen. I promised you a short session for today, which I don't think will be the case, but I'll luckily enough, I've had some great introductions from the previous presentation, so I can go over the introduction a little quicker. So you can see my screen, that's great. I will be talking about home learning environment and numerical skills in COVID times. And more specifically, we were interested in looking at the development of numerical and cognitive skills in toddlers from the ages of 2 and 3, and the influence of socioeconomic status and home learning environment during the COVID-19 lockdown, so the very first one, in France, in Paris. So Caylee already nicely introduced how socioeconomic status can have an impact on the development of cognitive skills and early numerical skills. And one of the suggestions is that this happens through the home learning environment. So for instance, in low socioeconomic households, there might be more stress, which is not good for cognitive stimulation, or as Caylee also said, for high socioeconomic households, they have more books, more resources, which might be more cognitive stimulation and which could help the development of the child. However, during the first COVID-19 lockdown, this completely changed the home learning environment, and we were interested in looking what impact the COVID-19 lockdown had on the home learning environment, whether socioeconomic status had a difference, so between low and higher socioeconomic households, what was the effect of the COVID-19 lockdown, and to see how this influenced the development of the cognitive and numerical skills of toddlers between 2 and 3 year olds. So two of the main things to say is that, first of all, so the home learning environment changed in a way that this became the only learning environment for toddlers, which was interesting then to look at, okay, what is actually happening in the home learning environment without seeing school or nursery input. But also the home learning environment changed drastically for the parents, because either they were furloughed maybe, or they had to work from home, or they still had to work, but the child was at home. So it was very complicated, as you all know, especially if you have toddlers at home. So we were looking to explore the influence of SES, the socioeconomic status and the home learning environment, on the development of cognitive and early number skills in these toddlers. And for this, we wanted to test at 3 time points. So before the COVID lockdown, during the COVID lockdown, and after the first COVID lockdown. These, of course, are not pure measures. So for instance, the before COVID lockdown is not a great baseline measure because we needed a bit of time to create questionnaires and tasks. So we asked the parent at time 1, which was already during the first lockdown, to reflect back on the mathematics activities, for instance, in the home learning environment that they did before COVID lockdown. So it wasn't a perfect measure, but we tried to adjust for it. And then the during COVID lockdown was about 2 months in. And then after the first COVID lockdown, again, not a perfect measure. So this meant that schools were open again and nurseries were open again and children could actually get out of the house. But for parents, things didn't change massively. They were still working a lot from home. And also, even in schools, if there was one case positive, then the school had to close down. So it was still a bit of a messy after COVID lockdown time point. So we had a hypothesized model looking at the SES. We expected it to influence the growth in frequency of mathematics activities done at home from before COVID lockdown till during COVID lockdown, so from time 1 to time 2, because parents would just have more time and more time with their children. We also expected this growth in frequency of math activities to be predictive of the growth in numerical skills at 2 different measures, one reported by the parent and one a task that I will explain in a little bit. So we expected this to predict the growth in numerical skills, and also we expected SES to have an impact on the brief P, so the executive functions, the growth in brief P between before COVID and after, during COVID. And we expected the brief P as well to have an impact on the numerical skills that we measured. So to have a close look at the measurement, so socioeconomic status, we had the education level of both parents and we had the occupation level of both parents, which was tested at time 1, together with some other demographic information and information on the changed situation during COVID. We had the brief P and we will use the global executive composite that was tested at time 1, 2, and 3. So this is a task measuring executive functions as reported by the parent. And then we had we created a maths questionnaire, which was parent report, which had questions on numerical skills of the child, questions on maths activities in the home learning environment, maths anxiety of the parent, and general anxiety, which this questionnaire was tested at time 1, 2, and 3. And then we created an early number awareness task. We call it early number awareness. I will explain it shortly. Tested again at time 1, 2, and 3. And then we had non-mathematical activities as well, such as reading, playing, outside, inside with adults or not. So for the early number awareness task, the one we created was based on the principle of SFON, so spontaneous focus on numbers, but changed a little bit because SFON is often just you have it yes or no. So we wanted a little bit more variability. So the parent had to show a picture such as this one to the child, asked to describe the picture. So the parent was instructed to write down exactly what the child said without asking any other questions apart from, is there anything else that you see? And then the picture would be scored on 3 different levels, whether the child uses singular or plural, for instance, cows and clouds rather than cow and cloud, but then in French, whether they use quantifiers, so for instance, a couple of cows, a bunch of flowers, and then whether they use numbers and how many. So the analysis plan, we pre-registered the analysis plan with 3 main steps. So first, just a confirmatory factor analysis, for the questionnaire, so to validate the questionnaires and to see whether measurement invariance was established between the time points so that the construct remained the same between the time points. If this would be okay, then we would use the factor scores. If not, we could use the summation scores of the questionnaires to use them in a latent change analysis, and then explore the regressions from the hypothesized model that I showed in the beginning. So for the confirmatory factor analysis, the first issue was that a lot of data were missing, but not at random. So first of all, between the time points, we see at time 3, for instance, we lose over 100 participants, which is quite normal for longitudinal data. But even within the time points, the data wasn't missing at random, so we couldn't just impute all the data, unfortunately. We still did the CFA to check, to validate the questionnaire. We use an ordinal robust estimator, and we deleted 4 of the items for maths activities, which after this, the model fitted well, and we kept we could keep all the other items in. The scalar measurement invariance was not established at the 3 time points, so the construct wasn't necessarily the same for the 3 time points, which is likely due to the lower sample size of time 3, because this came up as a large warning, but the scalar measurement invariance was established for time 1 and time 2, so we can still do the change analysis with time 1 and time 2. So we use the summation scores not to have too many issues with this non-random missing data. And then we use the weighted score for the early number awareness task based on the 3 levels between plural, quantifiers, and numbers. So as a reminder, this was the hypothesized model. And then here is a very large, ugly table full of data. I also have a figure just to not look too long at this ugly table. But basically, I'm still showing it to highlight the non-significant results. I'm guessing I'm just staying in line with Venera and Caylee. So we look here at the change of early number awareness, the change of mathematics as reported by the parents, the change of mathematics activities in the home learning environment, the change of global executive composite, which is the brief P-score, and non-mathematics activities. So I want to highlight that we found no significant predictor of the change of the brief P-score, so the global executive composite, and not even the global executive composite at time 1. So basically our model, the only predicted significant link was between SES and the growth in frequency of mathematics activities in the home learning environment. However, this didn't seem to have an impact on the growth of both numerical skills, so either reported by the parents or in the early number awareness task. And as said before, we didn't find any predictor for the growth in brief P. So needless to say that this was not a good model, this wasn't a good fit. So hence why I just want to talk very briefly on descriptive to see what is going on. I will go straight to the pictures. It's the same as in the table form, but it's going to be easier to see. So this is the early number awareness for the 3 time points. So we can see that at time 3, the children were a lot better, a lot more focused on numbers. And this time 3 was also the time when they went back to nurseries or other environments. So maybe this could have an influence on it. While we can see in time 1 and time 2, they stay very stable, although there's lots of individual differences as well. For the number of activities done in the home learning environment, the parents reported that they did more number of activities at time 2 and that this remains similar at time 3 compared to before COVID lockdown. This was also reflected in the number scales of the child as reported by the parent, that time 1 they did lower, and then time 2 and time 3 they were better, although at time 3 doesn't change much. So when they go back to nursery or preschool, it's not noticeable. And the global executive composite is a bit of a mix of everything. But time 1, they actually score higher than time 2 and time 3. So very quick conclusion. Unfortunately, I don't have any strong conclusions because we don't have any for now. But we do have lots of questions that are left, and that can be answered with secondary data analysis that was also planned in the pre-registration anyway. So we will have a look at what exactly is going on during this COVID lockdown in the development of cognitive and numerical skills for these children. Maybe there's some kind of bias in reporting from the parents as well because of their changed experience with the home learning environment and then their child from before COVID and after. And by changed, I mean they see a lot more of their child. Maybe the child is getting a lot more bored easily because they don't have anything else to do. So this could maybe bias the reporting and the brief and also the number skills. So this can be looked at. And then we also wanted to look at possible other mediating factors during the COVID lockdown, which didn't have to do with SES or the frequency of math activities in the home learning environment. So we've come to the end. So lots of non-significant results for the 3 presenters. I'll stop sharing. So if there's any more questions for any of the presenters, thank you for being here and for sticking with us a little bit later than planned for. Are there any questions?
Hello. Hi, Ilse. Hello. Thank you for the really interesting symposium. But maybe it's sad in the sense that this failures to show associations with the home environment seem to be quite common, and maybe that's really obvious. But do you have any intuition about where this literature should go next? Then should we stop measuring home environment variables? Does it matter, but only for some children? Does it matter only in some environments? Any thoughts? I don't know.
Yeah, so I think especially Caylee was also saying that she also measured during the COVID period. I think during the COVID period, everything changed a lot for everybody. And there's families that will have more time, other families that will have other priorities, financial stress or something. So I think it's just very difficult to find predictors in this chaos of COVID. So that might have been an issue. And then I know lots of other research has found an effect for home learning environment, but maybe it is, like, as you say, specific to some families and specific to some areas. I don't know if any of the other presenters has more to say about this.
I think it might be helpful for children that maybe struggle with math. So maybe there the home learning environment has a bigger impact.
Not a massive answer for now. I know Christoph has his hand up. I don't know if it's another question or maybe related to this.
Related to this, thanks so much for the symposium. And I just was wondering whether it's really like a vital explanation to tell that it's because of COVID that it doesn't work. I'm not much into home learning environment, but like these discussions that it doesn't work, I remember are quite long, and they started certainly before COVID. So I think it's kind of, a lot changed because of COVID, but we had these discussions already earlier.
Yeah, just to, also put into context, we asked a short questionnaire about COVID within the questionnaire. And one of the questions was, has your child's routine changed because of COVID? And the majority answered no, because these children weren't going to an ECD center before COVID, and their life pretty much remained the same. So it didn't even, it wouldn't have had that big of a change from, pre-COVID to post-COVID. So I think I agree with you, Christoph. I think there's something there even before COVID that we can look at.
So I know Fiona has her hand raised as well.
Oh yeah, no, I wasn't going to speculate on the lack of relationships with the home number environment. Like I haven't found a relationship with the home number environment either. Or I will have a little speculation. I think part of it is to do with how challenging the activities are compared to the ability of the child in whatever's used to assess it. Because when you actually look at the papers that do find a relationship, it tends to be that they have like advanced scales that do. When you actually look at the items that are in them, they tend to be very advanced activities for the age of the children. So you're often left wondering, are children who are more advanced engaging in more advanced activities, or are those activities actually, promoting children's number skills? But I didn't put my hand up really to speculate on that. I was just interested in your early number awareness measure. I was just a bit interested in a little bit more about that, about how you scored it, because I could see that you kind of got a continuous variable from it. Were you kind of counting up the number of times that they used numbers, or I was just interested in it really?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty difficult to create because we didn't want to measure saying, okay, they have SPON or not. So we just came up with this. So it was a weighted scale with the 3 levels. So first, if they see plurals, if they notice plurals or singular, which was the lowest level. So this one was just, if they did, they had 1. If they didn't, they had 0. The next one was quantifiers, whether they used a bunch of or a lot of flowers, for instance. Again, this was score 1 or 0, but this time it was it counted for double of the first one. So quantifiers was counted double, and then using numbers was counted triple, and then it depended as well on how many numbers. So if they used 4 numbers, it was 4 times 3, and then counted up like this. So as soon as they use numbers, they score a lot higher than the children that
who didn't, and they didn't have to be the right numbers. It was just kind of like, so if they said there were like 4 cows and there were 3 cows, it didn't matter. It was just whether they used them or not.
No, so they per level we had 2 questions as well. So just whether they used it, yes or no, and then an accuracy measure, which was so if I remember correctly, these were all scored equally, but it's just an extra measure. But as soon as they use numbers, so I think for the numbers, as soon as they use numbers, they had triple the points for using numbers. And then they had +1 at each time that they used it correctly.
No, thanks. I was just interesting because it's just interesting to have measures for very young children that aren't very kind of formalized tests, if that makes sense. I was just kind of interested in how it works. Thanks.
Any other questions or input? If not, I want to thank the speakers, so Venera and Caylee. Thank you so much. Thank you for the questions and the discussion. I think next week will also be on the home learning environment. So we can compare the results. Maybe they'll be a bit different from today, but the continuing for today was not much significant results. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ilse.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.